Well, let's go now to our Focus report, which takes us this Friday on a train ride from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, to that of neighbouring Djibouti. The new railway line, built and paid for by China, went into operation just a few weeks ago. But over a century ago, the French had already built a rail line between the two African nations. It essentially stopped functioning 10 years ago, but a few cars kept running. Now, in cities where the old line stopped, expectations for the new one are high. This report by Nathalie Tissot, Vincent Dublanche and Julia Steers.
It looks like the middle of nowhere, but just 10 kilometers from central Addis Ababa, the first passengers arrive at the new Lebu station. After 4 years of construction, the electrified railroad line finally connects Ethiopia to Djibouti. For Biruk and many Ethiopians, this first trip means a lot.
There were only two means of transport on this route, either the bus or the plane. This third option is a very good alternative.
He's returning to his home village, Dire Dawa, the last stop before Djibouti. Right now, it's one of 5 stations serviced by the rail line. When it's finished, there will be 19. The route is the same as the old railroad, built by the French at the end of the 19th century.
It's been a very long time since I took a train. Back then, I was very young, 7 or 8 years old. Then it stopped working overnight, so I wanted to test out the new train.
12 hostesses work on each train as Chinese staffers watch over them, monitoring a 6-year training program for local employees. China lent both countries 70% of the $4 billion put into the construction and operation of the railway. The sleeper cars, the wagon bar, everything is in line with international standards.
Every passenger can dine in here. It has a capacity of 50 people can dine. One person can stay here for 30 minutes only.
The Dire Dawa station stop approaches. After 8 hours of travel, it's the end of the trip for Biruk and most of the passengers. The first train arrived in the city in 1902 at the time of the French railway. For the new stop, they've moved the station from the old location.
Back in the day, there were a lot of people here because many traders would converge at this station to buy tickets and board the trains.
Fantahun was a conductor for over 20 years on the old line. His father was also a railway man. Thanks to his work, he learned to speak French, the language the rail company used at the time. Though most of the old cars have fallen into disrepair, one line manages to operate twice a week. In the workshops next to the station, workers still repair old parts. But since the old line between Addis Ababa and Dire Dawa has stopped, most of the 60-odd workers are unemployed. The new train was built without them.
I'm very sad because our old train line here used to be the lifeline of our town, Dire Dawa. The sector employed many people here, but now there's a new lifeline with the Chinese railway. But they have yet to forge deep connections with the people of Dire Dawa, especially that the new train station is 10 kilometers away.
The newly launched train departs Dire Dawa nearly empty. 14 hours later, it arrives at Nagad, Djibouti, the end of the line. The stop is just a few kilometers away from the port at Dorle in Djibouti. The day after, the parade of trucks is non-stop. 90% of goods imported and exported via Ethiopia pass through here, the main access point to the Red Sea. A few hundred meters from the terminal, the containers are loaded into the new trains. In the nearby city of Mojo, goods arrive at its dry port before being distributed inland. Currently, over 1,000 trucks travel by road daily, but with the new train, that number is expected to decrease, as will the transit time for goods.
The train brings containers at a time, 106 containers. It brings 3 trips per week now, which can continue up to 4 trips per day.
Mohamed Kaire is a former Djiboutian rail worker. At 65 years old, he returned to work when the new railroad was built.
I'm so proud to be here right now because along this railroad, I can tell you, there was nothing, only gravel and dust. Now, thanks to the railroad, we have electricity. All the villages on its path now will soon have electricity.
Authorities in Ethiopia and Djibouti hope that the new train will allow them to develop the economies of both countries. In the long run, 4 to 5 million tons of goods will be transported annually by this train.
Well, for more on this, let's cross to our guest, economy advisor Jean-Joseph Boileau. Hello, thank you very much for being with us on France 24. Now, this is another way in which China is investing in Africa. What's in it for Beijing?
Well, you must understand that today China has overcapacities in its own country, and especially in the railway sector, construction sector, etc. So if China wants to continue to grow by 6-7%, and this is what they expect, otherwise they have to face the financial crisis due to the non-performing loans in the banking sector. So they need to export. Now, they don't need to export anymore the very cheap goods, despite they do, but they mostly try now to export what they call the infrastructure big companies. And the only place in the world where you have to do everything from scratch and where there's no protectionism against China is mostly Asia and Africa. And especially in Africa, because they have invested in a huge way in the commodity sector, mining, oil, etc. They need to ship out of Africa in an efficient way. And the best way today, clearly, is the railway sector, because Africa is a very large continent, and the cost of transportation can really compromise the profitability of the investment made by China. So it's a win-win. This is the, the Chinese slogan, but it's mostly win-win game for China today in the short run. They export their knowledge, their expertise, their investment, and on the way back, they re-import the commodities from Africa. Question is whether or not for the on the medium term, on the long run, it will be positive for Africa. And this, I think so, yes.
Are authorities, local authorities, willing or able to take care of and update such infrastructures? Or does it create a dependency?
You mean dependency vis-à-vis China?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I just come back from Ethiopia, and you have heard that there's a prime minister resignation very recently, and I was surprised to see how bad is the image of China in Ethiopia. Partly because the Chinese have their entry in the government, and government is a minority government actually in Ethiopia. It's a very authoritarian regime. The investment made by China with this regime may be not the best investment actually for China. So, but they don't have the possibility to escape from this trap. They need to export, they need to expand, they need to invest in developing countries, and Ethiopia was on that wonderland for them.
Jean-Joseph Boileau, thank you very much for having spoken to us. And that's where we're leaving this edition live from Paris. Stay tuned for a full news update at the top of the hour.